Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the new weekly podcast about Miami sports through the Riverfront. My name is Jack Miller. I'm here with Ted Brennan. We'll be here every week from now until the end of the season to talk about Miami sports and everything going on in that world. Ted, if you want to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into the cover in Miami.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Ted Brennan. I'm a senior at Miami University. Feels a little weird to say, but yeah, senior year's here. I got into covering sports specifically through my high school. I went to a high school called Darien High School in Connecticut, and we started off a live streaming broadcasting service out there for high school sports and other town events. And I fell in love with covering sports and calling sports and things like that. And I came to Miami, started working for the broadcast production team out here, and got involved with the Miami Student. I ran their sports podcast for a while, Press Box Thoughts. After about 2 years, I decided to leave the Miami Student to look for new opportunities. And this year, the Riverfront came calling, and couldn't pass up a great opportunity like the Riverfront.
Yeah, well, it's awesome to have you on board. We're really looking forward to what we're going to do this season.
Yeah,
Some of
absolutely.
you guys might know me already. I've been covering Miami for just under a year now. I'm back for year two. This is actually my fifth year on Miami's campus. I just finished my undergrad program in May in sport management and journalism, but back here to finish up a master's in sport management. So I love covering the team. I love Miami sports, and really excited about a fun season ahead. Just a little bit of a background about how this show is going to work going forward. The plan currently is to do a weekly episode on Thursdays, recapping last week's action and previewing whatever game is going to come up on the weekend. The aim is for these shows to be about an hour. We'll toy with that as the season rolls on and we get a little more experienced with how this show operates. There will also be some fun special episodes thrown in the season. We're still kind of brainstorming how those are going to work. But yeah, we're still going to be covering games on site. There'll still be live Twitter coverage. There'll still be written recaps, some video recaps throughout the season, but this is more of a loosely based, loosely formed show to try and just talk through what we've seen over the last week, what we're expecting to see at the weekend, and go from there. Ted and I know we talked a little bit about some special episodes we had planned, but we'd love to get your input in the comments or on Twitter. Feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to talk about any ideas. One that I was really excited about was a draft of Miami legends. I think there's enough to make it a fun contest between the two of us so you could pick the best Miami legends. And ideally, as we move forward towards the end of the season, I'd like to start doing some live episodes ahead of big games. Not really sure how it's going to work yet, but that's the plan is towards the end of the season as hopefully Miami remains in MAC championship contention. And as basketball rolls on, we'll start to do some live episodes. But yeah, Ted, any thoughts on how that's going to work?
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of the live episodes ahead of big games. Maybe we even do like a watch party or stream party if we can't get to the games, and we kind of stream the game a little bit, talk it through, see what we're seeing, and get some fan input from that.
Yep, that's what we're here to do. We both love Miami sports and are really excited about this season. Both teams that we've been covering in the past, football and basketball, look like they're going to be something to watch this season. Very interesting team to follow. All right, well, let's jump right in, Ted. Obviously, Miami's 0-1. Tough loss in week one in Evanston at Northwestern. I was in Chicago for the game. Sadly, could not get a ticket. But yeah, cool new stadium. Stadium looks cool for Northwestern. Obviously, it's not, Big Ten standard. It's not going to hold 30,000, but for a temporary basis, it's a cool, unique venue that very few other venues in college sports offer. Like the lakefront aspect of it is awesome. It has a very intimate field, so I thought that was pretty cool. But for the actual game, I don't know. It seemed almost like a high school field. So I know there was a lot of positive press about it. I personally didn't love it. I thought it was kind of a tacky, underwhelming thing. But I know I might be in the minority on that.
Yeah, I mean, well, the Northwestern's doing what they can while their stadium's under renovation, and why they build up a new stadium. From a television standpoint, it looked terrible. The cameras were in odd places. The lighting was off. And from a broadcast standpoint, for myself, there was a lot of things that I would have done differently. The irises were off, so it was really bright or it was really dark. So if they can work out the kinks, then I think the television feel would be a little bit better. But from a first game standpoint, the television aspect could have been a lot better.
Yeah, everyone I've talked to that was actually at the game and in the stadium said it was fine, that the game experience was cool, and obviously it's a pretty cool view of the city from Evanston. Evanston's a gorgeous town, about 45 minutes north of Chicago, so can't beat the view, can't beat the location, but for an actual college football setting, I think Ted's right. There is a lot of stuff that needs to improve. Let's move on and talk about the actual game now. Enough about the facility. Disappointing loss, 13-6. Yeah, obviously it sucks that Miami starts the year 0-1. I know there was a lot of talk that maybe this was an upset in the making, especially after we had beaten Northwestern 2 years ago at Ryan Field, which is sadly no more. Obviously that didn't happen. We both talked about this briefly off camera, but the defense looks good. The defense looks as good as advertised. Ty Wise and Matt Salopek are going to be wrecking balls for offenses all season long, but the offense has a lot of question marks that need to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at that team 2 years ago, there's a lot of continuity, but then there's a whole lot of differences. And I think the biggest difference right now is the fact that Brett Gabbert is fully healthy. There have been some times where we've seen him in the past, whether it was last year and the year before that, where he's not healthy and he's kind of playing through different injuries. And 2 years ago, Avion Smith was the starting quarterback for that game because Gabbert got hurt in the Kentucky game and he was out for almost the whole year. So it was, at least from who's under center, it's a completely different team. And even that offensive line is a lot different. This year we are lucky to have a lot of returning starters on the offensive line. Colby Borders is the first one that comes to mind. He made a big statement about saying, I'm coming back for my senior year. And, up and down that offensive line, you got a lot of returners from last year, but 2 years ago, that's a completely different offensive line. I want to say Rusty Feth was still on that team, and he transferred to Iowa, so that's a huge loss. I mean, that's it's one of your best offensive linemen going to the Big Ten, and so it's a much different team in years past, but the upset possibility was still there, and they were right in this game, right up until the end. And I think one of the things that hurt them was the fact that they have a new kicker, Dom DeJobin. He's never kicked professionally before or collegiately before, and he comes in and he misses a field goal that would have been 13-9 at so that's a big question mark that they're going to have to answer is how is the offense going to survive, and then what happens if the offense gets into that field goal zone, but they don't have Graham Nicholson anymore. Graham Nicholson could hit from 50, 60 yards if he wanted to. DeJobin, what is his range? Where does he stop? And where does the offense have to make sure they feel comfortable with putting DeJobin in?
Yeah, I agree. It was interesting to watch. Chuck Martin said something about it. I think it was on Monday. Is how the team was in positive field position. I think it was 5 out of 9 drives, and yet only 6 points. I don't know if that had anything to do with being overly aggressive on fourth downs when you were in that kind of gray area, because you don't have Graham Nicholson to kick from 55. And Jobin by no means was bad. He hit from 42 and 48, which were impressive, especially considering how windy it is at that field. Anyone who's been to Lake Michigan knows that it is a wind tunnel out there. So credit to Jobin for stepping up and making those kicks, but you don't have the All-American Graham Nicholson anymore who can connect from those gray area distances. So I think you're absolutely right. It does make a huge difference. Secondly, you mentioned the offensive line. I want to bring up Reed Holsky, who's back. He's on a bunch of watch lists, the Outland Trophy and the Lombardi Trophy. Having him in the O-line is going to be crucial this season. Next to Borders, it's going to be crucial I know we're going to talk about it later, but the run game, like establishing that run game, having those two guys step up is going to be huge this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, continuity wise, those are guys who've been playing together for 3-4 years almost at this point. And, those are 2 players who, when you get them out in space and you get them blocking for that lead runner, I mean, good luck trying to stop it. I mean, yeah. They are big, athletic, strong offensive linemen. And for someone like Coach Martin, who wants to have, a ground and pound running game, you need those big offensive linemen to help out. And There's a couple new starters this year. We'll see how everybody meshes in. But so far, mixed results.
Yeah. Well, let's stick on the offensive side of the football here since we're talking about it, and we'll start at the quarterback position. Yeah, we already talked briefly about Brett Gabbert. Yes, he's healthy this year, and he admitted this too in press conferences and in Chuck Martin's conference over on Monday. He said he was rusty, which understandable after he missed all this time, and he didn't look like himself, in my opinion. It did not look like a typical Brett Gabbert performance that we've been so accustomed to seeing over the last few years. He didn't miss any throws egregiously, but there were definitely some throws that like you'd expect him to make. Like he's an experienced quarterback, and in a game like that, like you need big plays, and that was something we were desperately missing on Saturday. Was like a big chunk plays, and I think that obviously as the season goes on, he'll grow into that role, but that aspect was missing on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing that really hurts is he's missing kind of a true number one wide receiver. You mentioned that we've mentioned that he's now healthy, he's rusty. Before the game, they mentioned he was just cleared for full football activities in July. So he's coming in July after not having played since the Toledo game where he unfortunately got hurt. And then it's like, all right, it's right in the camp. It's right into your sixth year, your final year. And then you got to go on the road to play a Big Ten school. Like that. I don't envy that position. But in terms of the number one wide receiver in that game, it was Cade McDonald, who last year, if you heard Cade McDonald was topping the charts in the wide receiving room, your eyes would kind of pop out of your head a little bit. You'd be like, Cade McDonald? And that's no shot at Cade McDonald. He is a very talented wide receiver. It's just that last year they used him a lot in kick returning and punt returning. And I want to say he was all MAC in kick returning for special teams. If not, he was definitely an honorable mention. He had that incredible play in the MAC championship game where people thought he called a fair catch. He didn't. He picked it up and bolted down the sideline for, I want to say, 40, 50 yards. But no one has established themselves yet as like that true number one wide receiver where, Gabbert's used to having like a Mac hip and hammer where you can throw it down the field, get a bunch of yards. And, one of these wide receivers is going to have to step up. And there's been a lot of influx of talent coming in from different schools. And look at Cade McDonald. He's a, fifth year from Michigan State. He transferred in from Michigan State. And that's now showing that he's getting a chance to play wide receiver. But someone's going to have to step up. Maybe it is Cade McDonald. Maybe we keep seeing his name top the charts. Maybe it's someone else. But I'd like to see someone become that number one wide receiver. And, going back to Gabbert, I think you saw it that he has a connection with McDonald and he relied on him a lot. So we'll see where the season goes. And even Jack Coldiron, you didn't hear his name a lot, and he's coming back from an injury. He's fired up for his fifth year. He really wanted to come back for another go around, and you didn't hear his name called all that much. I want to say he had one or two catches. I think he dropped the ball that was for surefire touchdown, but a lot of rust on some of these players who have been here for a while, and Miami's really relying on for big seasons.
Yeah, I've got the numbers in front of me. Coldiron had 2 catches for 20 yards, and then it was a 16-yarder and a 4-yarder. But, you're absolutely right. Coldiron coming back is a huge, huge upgrade on how the team looked last year. Not to, talk bad on any of our tight ends last year, but Coldiron is a reliable option for Brett. And, looking at the numbers from 2023, obviously Brett missed some time at it was Avion Smith a lot, but there was 3 tight ends who caught balls. And if we can have Coldiron in the lineup every single week, that's a reliable target to build a connection with, even if they've both missed some time. As for receivers, there's 2 that stand out as like guys who could be the number one going forward. Javon Tracy obviously made some noise last year as a freshman. He's back for another year. And Andre Johnson coming in from Arizona State, I think he could be the true outside threat that Brett needs. Javon was more of like a slot guy, if I remember correctly, last year, like picking up short yardage and taking it for yards after the catch. Reggie Virgil's back. He had 3 catches against Northwestern. But you're absolutely right. Cade McDonald is probably the most reliable threat out of this receiving core right now. He had the longest catch of the day against Northwestern. He had 24 yards. Obviously, he had over 100 yards on the day. But there isn't, as you said, there isn't a Mac Hippenhammer, there isn't a Gage Larvadane where there's that true long ball threat that really spreads out the defense. So, I mean, we
Yeah.
may see that in the coming weeks, but for right now, there's still questions about like how that long passing game is going to work.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you're right in that Javon Tracy and Andre Johnson they're going to be the ones who are going to step up. Javon Tracy, he's got blazing speed. He can get by defenders. And again, maybe it's just the fact that they're playing a Big Ten school and the Big Ten talent is just that much better where, Tracy can't get that much separation. But if you put him against a MAC school, he's gone. One of the things that I wanted to mention that I forgot to about Gabbert, he looked shaky, but he did some things that he used to do when he was younger, where he's only looking at one read. You don't really see him move his head, look off different reads, go through his progressions. It was looking at a receiver, and that's where it's going. And I think he gets into a little bit of trouble with that, where they know where it's going if you're just looking at one guy. And
Right.
he's got to go through his progressions, and he's got to look at different reads. And hopefully, once he shakes that rust off, he can go back to doing that. He did that. I want to say his junior year, or maybe it was his redshirt sophomore year. He's been here for so long; they all kind of
Right.
blur together. But when he was looking at his receivers, going through his progressions, he was a top quarterback in the MAC. And unfortunately, he's still a little rusty. He's still a little shaky. But hopefully, against Cincinnati, he can get some of his confidence back.
Yeah, I just want to bring up one more thing on the Northwestern side. Like, this is a completely different Northwestern team that we played in 2022. Like in 2022, Northwestern went 1-11 in Pat Fitzgerald's last year. They went 8-5 last year. Like, that is an incredible turnaround. This team
Hmm.
has a lot of momentum behind them. And in David Braun's second year, I think there was a lot of pressure coming into the game, and they handled it well. I credit to Northwestern; they played really well. Um, I thought Mike Wright, the quarterback, was really good against us. I thought he made plays when he had to. He wasn't spectacular. Didn't look like a Heisman contender by any means, but in a game like that against the defense that Miami has, he looked poised. He made the right reads when he needed to. And in the end, he led the team to a victory. So I know he's already been benched after the loss against Duke, which I thought was very harsh, but that's college football now. If you don't succeed, you're dropped like a hot potato. Like, that's just how the sport is right now.
Yeah, I didn't really understand the benching either, but kind of doing a little bit more of a deep dive into the numbers. He at least against Miami, he was 18 of 30, only threw for 178 yards, and that's a credit to the Miami defense of all things. But he had a 28 QBR and it averaged less than 6 yards per pass against a MAC school that may get it done, but against an ACC opponent and then getting into Big Ten play, that may not get it done. And look, he was great on the ground. He had 9 carries, 65 yards, and a touchdown, and a very big touchdown at that. It was a real momentum killer for Miami. They were looking like they were about to get the stop, and then he rips off a 13-yard touchdown. But I can kind of understand it. But yeah, it did seem a little harsh that he got 2 games, and it's like, all right, you're done. But maybe this is what Northwestern needs to give him a bit of a spark, give him a bit of more of a chance in the Big Ten.
All right. Well, let's move on to the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, holding in 13 points against a Big Ten opponent, is an impressive outcome. Even if it didn't get the win, 13 points on the road at a new stadium, at a team's first game at their new stadium with a lot of momentum behind them after a good season last season. That was a tough situation to walk into, and I thought Miami's defense played really, really well. We've already talked about Matt Salopek and Ty Wise, like that too. It was going to be a problem for defenses all season long, but all over, like in all three phases of the game, it felt like they performed really well. And I mean, that's going to be Miami's strength going forward. So there's no surprises there, but it was encouraging to see that in a game that didn't go Miami's way not often, that the defense still looked as good as they did.
I think one of the things you're going to see with this Redhawks team this year is a lot of quote unquote ugly games, right? Score is going to be low. It's going to be gritty, tough football. You may not see a lot of scoring in some of these games, but what it's going to come down to at the end of the day is this Miami defense stepping up, getting the ball back for their offense. I mean, they had 2 fumbles on Mike White, and they recovered. Recovered both of them. Salopek and Ugu. They both made huge stops, and one of them was at the 1-yard line, if I remember correctly. It was a huge momentum gain for Miami to stop them at the 1. So this, their defense is going to be that strength. And I think having someone like Ryan Strader come back and be in that secondary, that's huge. He had a great freshman season. And look, in today's game, he could have gone somewhere else. He could have looked for other opportunities, and he probably could have gotten some money to go to these other schools, but he's stuck here. And I think that's going to pay off big time for him, and it's going to pay off big time for this Miami defense. Having a leader like like Strader in the secondary, that's huge, especially after having someone like Michael Dowell last year. This is Michael Dowell's a kid. He's been here for 5 years. He had or not 5 years. He's played 5 years, but he's been at Miami for a couple years, and he was a leader in the locker room, a leader on the field at that safety position. And unfortunately, he had a terrible injury in the MAC championship game. So losing someone like him, but then Strader can come in and fill that role. I think that's going to be huge for that Miami defense, especially if Strader stays another year and unfortunately Wise and Salopek have to leave. Someone having a leader like him on the field is going to be huge for this defense.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think a lot of the press around Miami's defense revolves around guys like Salopek and guys like Wise and the pressure they're able to create up front and the fumbles they were able to create against Northwestern and last season. But an unheralded note about this Miami team is how good that secondary is. It's not just Strader too. Like I think Luke Evans played very well against Northwestern in his first game in college. I don't think he played at all at Mississippi State last year. I think he's a redshirt freshman. So for his first collegiate outing, he looked really good. And next to Rayon Strader, that's a young set of corners that can really put pressure on MAC teams and Power 5 teams that will play in the coming years. We have the experience of Ambe Caldwell, and William Hardrick coming back too. And those guys are going to be crucial for helping those guys like Evans and like Strader develop into better corners as they progress in the years in the college game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I really liked what Silas Walters did. It doesn't show up in the scorebook. I think he had one solo tackle, but you want your safeties having one solo tackle. You don't want your safeties racking up the tackles because then it shows like, okay, our corners are getting burned.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, but again, Silas Walters, he's been here. He won a MAC championship last year, and he's a big part of this defense. And I think you can look up and down the board at some of these names. I mean, obviously Salopek and Wise, but Eli Blakey, he's been here, Brian Ugu, William Hardrick, as you mentioned, Oscar McWood, little brother of Ryan Wood, but Ryan McWood, he's trying to make a name for himself. And he's been playing very well. He played really well last year. He's already got 4 tackles this year. Nasir Washington played really well, and that's, I think, one of the strengths of this Miami defense is that they have a lot of guys they can just plug in and play, right? It's not someone that's going to take a lot of time to develop. I mean, Kobe Hilton is a guy who was crucial to the Miami defensive line last year. He got 1 tackle this game. And it shows that, like, we can, the Miami defense, Chuck Martin has this luxury of being able to say, okay, you know what, let's run this defensive scheme. Maybe I want to run a 3-4 this time around, but then the next time I'm going to run a 4-3. And it's like, boom, let's get, this guy off, this guy on, here we go. So, there were a couple of plays where I thought Miami could have done better, but again, that's going to happen in every game. Defensively, there was like 1 or 2 third downs where I was like, that should have been a stop. Maybe that pass shouldn't have gotten off. I thought they played a little too much zone on third down. You could tell that, there was the cornerbacks were playing a lot of the deep zone, not necessarily looking for the flats. And I think Northwestern did a very good job at looking, especially as the game went on, is looking for those flats. And I don't think Miami fully adjusted to that. And I want to see how it progresses this weekend, if Miami's going to play more zone on third down or if they're going to say, hey, we're going to try to play a little more man. But overall, the defense only let up 178 passing yards. Like that's all you want in a defensive unit.
Right. And again, this is a MAC on Big Ten matchup. So 13 points is by far the worst case scenario. The one thing I think we've talked about a little bit off camera, but I really think needs to be emphasized going forward is the rush defense. Like, it was not good against Northwestern at all. Like 150 yards on the ground is not going to win you a game on the road. And this has been a consistent problem for Miami dating back to last season. Like, They gave up 250 on the ground against Miami in Florida. They gave up 275 against Cincy at Nippert last year. Yes, we still won that game, but 275 yards on the ground is just far too many to tolerate. And they gave up almost the same amount against Ball State. That's a MAC school. And I mean, this defense is our at best asset. But if we keep giving up these gash plays on defense, on running plays, then it's going to keep us on the field and really prevent us from hitting our ceiling.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I mean, the rushing defense, if we had to pick one thing where Miami needs to get better, it's the rush defense. Mike Wright rushed for 65 yards. He was their leading rusher on 9 carries. That can't happen. You cannot have the quarterback be the leading rusher when you're trying to stop him. And I think that's what happened with some of these third down plays is like they're expecting the run, or they're expecting Wright to escape the pocket and run, that they want to play deep so they can get back. But that can't happen. And I don't want to get too much into Cincinnati preview right now, but Cincinnati's quarterback, Brennan Sorsby, he's not a pocket passer. He can escape the pocket and pick up big chunks with his legs. And as you said, it keeps the defense on there longer. It keeps them on for more plays. And at the end of the game, you saw it happen with, I think it was Mike Wright to seal the game. It was, second down, and we had gotten a stop on the first down, and it was 2nd and 14 or something like that. And Wright just rips off a 20-yard run to end the game. And it's like, if you get a stop there, you get the ball back with no timeouts, but you get a chance to go down the field. But now it's like, that just lost you the game.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting. I was listening to Coach Martin's press conference, and he kind of dove into the Mike Wright touchdown play, the scramble up the middle. And he said something about, I have the quote here, said, our spy guy had to step up to cover someone, so we didn't have our spy on the QB, and he scrambled in. I get it, it's week 1, but you can't have that happen on the road against a Big Ten school like that. Like, you can't have your spy get dragged away by man coverage. That's stuff that you should be able to clean up in practice. Obviously, it's one play, it's not the end of the world, and you can we've had the bye week to clean it up, but I think it's little things like that could stack up and prove to be a problem if they continue to happen.
Yeah. I mean, you say it's one play, but it's the one play that won Northwestern the game, right?
Right.
One mistake can cost you the game, and we saw it here with Miami. Is the one mistake, their QB spy went off the man coverage, and I think in that case you have to say, look, what's gonna hurt us more, the QB run or a pass for because there's a drag coming over the middle, like what's going to hurt more, a 4-yard pass or a possible touchdown run by the quarterback? And whoever the QB spy was, unfortunately, just made the decision that the 4-yard drag was going to hurt more, and it ended up being the wrong decision. But you can only beat a dead horse for so long. And like you said, I think they had this bye week to clean it up in practice, and I think we're going to see a rejuvenated Miami team.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, let's dive right into the week 3 preview. Sorry, I keep forgetting we had a bye week against UC at home. I don't know about you, Ted, but I think this is going to be the biggest home game that Miami's had since at least I've been here. And this is definitely the most hype around it. I've never seen an email go out saying that the student section might sell out. That's a first in my time here. So I don't know about you. I'm fired up for this weekend. I cannot be more excited. I think it's going to be a huge, huge day in Oxford.
Oh, absolutely. I think, one of the things about Miami's culture is that we're not really a big sports school. And, people would rather go uptown and have some fun on Saturdays and, walk all the way down to Jaeger and go watch the teams play. And I think one of the biggest things about the UC game is that Greek life is going to be there. So there's going to be a lot of different Greek life tents. So that's already a massive population that goes uptown on the weekends, and you're already bringing them to the field. You're already bringing them to Jaeger, and then it's just they just go right on in. And like you said, I haven't seen this much hype for a home game, I think, the whole time I've been at Miami, and that's saying something.
The closest thing I can think of is my sophomore year, we had UC come down for basketball.
Yeah,
and that game's too, but. Like, this is the first football game I can say with confidence that I've seen and heard it with this much anticipation and this much eagerness to go to the game, and not just like, oh, we have a game today.
Yeah, and I think part of it is that the big news over the summer was, and in the spring was, this is one of the last games
Yeah.
between Miami and Cincinnati for a while. Yeah, they decide to end the partnership in 2026. There's going to be no game in 2025, if I remember correctly, and it's going to be a neutral site in 2026. And again, I think that's another big thing that helps. It's not a neutral site game. It's not at like Paycor Stadium in Cincinnati, which is basically another home game for Cincinnati.
Hmm.
And you saw it last year, at Nippert Stadium, is that the Cincinnati fans and the Miami fans too, to a degree, they pack that stadium,
Oh yeah.
and it's gonna be the same thing here. Is Miami fans, and then whatever Cincy fans can get in are gonna pack the stadium, and I think that's another big thing about this game is that people know since Cincinnati fans are gonna try to come down,
Hmm.
and they're just like, we'll buy whatever ticket, we don't want to let them in,
Right. Yeah.
and I, like I said, I think you're going to see a rejuvenated Miami team, and I think the fact that they're going to have a near sold out crowd for probably the first time in some of these guys' careers. Like, I mean, I don't know if Brett Gabbert has ever experienced like a packed Yager Stadium nearly sold out crowd.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look, but I mean, this is the first time that Miami's hosted this game in 8 years. So 7 years. Sorry, 2017 was the last time they hosted it, but
Yeah, and
still like
again,
huge.
Miami won the victory bell last year.
Yeah.
So now it's like, okay, we got something to play for this time.
Hmm.
We got to defend home turf because we beat them on their turf, and they're looking at us and they're like, well, if they beat us on our home turf, we want to beat them on their home turf.
Right.
So I think the fans know that like there are massive implications to this game, and if you look at the season series, the total series, it's 60 to 7.
Yeah.
60 wins for Miami, 60 wins for Cincinnati, 7 ties. I mean, what more could you want?
Yeah. And I think something I was thinking about today is that for a lot of incoming freshmen, this is their first Miami football game. And that is something that I think Miami really needs to take advantage of and build on going forward, is that none of this younger class doesn't know that Miami doesn't sell out games. This younger class doesn't know that Miami doesn't usually draw for sports. So use this as a building block to say, hey, we want to build this sporting environment. We want to become this sports school, which may be true or not, but I think they should. But they should use this as a building block to say, hey, we want you guys in the stands every week, not just when Cincy comes to town.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing is like this, UC is a Power 5 school now,
Yeah.
right? Like they're in the Big 12, and you know, Miami may not win this game. The last couple of, first home games for Miami have been games against FCS schools or lower FBS schools that, they know they can kind of take advantage of and beat up on. And the students know that. They're like, well, I don't really want to go to a game that's, I know we're going to win. But
Hmm.
this is a game, you know, a huge rivalry. We're 45 minutes apart, and the fact that it's got massive implications. And then again, this is a Power 5 school. You don't really get to witness a lot of Power 5 schools travel to a Group of 5 school, and the Group of 5 school actually has a chance to beat them on home turf.
Right. Completely agree. All right. Well, let's actually dive into the game now. We'll actually talk about what's going to happen on the field. Let's talk a little bit about last year's game. Obviously, one of the greatest games at Miami that I've been able to witness. Definitely the best football game. 31-24 upset win at Nippert Stadium against UC. Under the lights, one of the most electric atmosphere. I sadly couldn't get a ticket for the game, but watching it on TV, you still felt like you were part of it, especially being part of that student body. Definitely one of the most electrifying games I've watched during my time in Miami. Shout out Yassine McKee for blocking what would have been the game winner to send the game to OT, and then picking the ball off in the end zone to win the game. We've all seen the highlights. We all know what happened last year. But yeah, Ted, anything to add about last year's game? What was your experience like watching the game?
Yeah, I mean, like you couldn't get a ticket to the game. Watched it with a couple buddies at home, and I mean, we were freaking out. I mean, because to beat them on their turf And to do it in the fashion that we did it too, it wasn't like we blew them out. It came down to the wire, like you said. Yoshie McKee, blocks the game-winning field goal. We're going nuts when that happens. Then we go into overtime, and McKee picks off Emory Jones. The whole house was buzzing.
Mm-hmm.
So, the hope is that this game can be very similar. I think it's gonna be great. I actually have a ticket this time, so I'll be able to go and experience it. But yeah, I think this has a chance to be again one of the greatest games in Miami's history.
Yeah, my hope is that even if Miami doesn't win, and Lord knows I hope Miami wins, but even if they don't win, that this game still lives up to the hype that it's been built up. So even if Miami doesn't win, if we have a game that's even close in excitement level as last year, I think we'll be very, very happy. Miami's coming into this game as a 6.5 point underdog. I think that's a pretty fair assessment. Cincinnati, obviously the Pitt loss is tough, but this is still a really good football team. This is still a team that can do damage and has shown they can do damage in the past couple of years. Miami, obviously 0-1, not a whole lot of offensive excitement so far, but the defense is still legit. So I think a touchdown's fair as a spread. Yeah, not much else to say about that from my perspective, but I think 6.5 points is about as fair as it can get. Any higher than that, and I think it would have been a little disrespectful.
Yeah, 6.5 feels fair. I think ESPN's betting odds are even lower. I think I checked probably an hour before recording. I think they're at 3.5 right now.
Oh wow.
And it's ESPN's power index is pretty close split in terms of percentage of who's going to win. But yeah, like you said, Cincinnati is still a very good team, and we'll dive more into that in just a second. But like you said, I hope the game lives up to the hype. That's the big thing. If I think either way, if it's a blowout, people are going to be a little disappointed. I mean, obviously, if it's a Miami blowout, people are going to be happy, and Cincinnati will be upset, and vice versa. But I think if it can live up to the hype, I think regardless of the outcome, people are going to leave this game talking about this game for a very long time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I when I was filling out my notes yesterday, it was 6.5. Now it's down to 3.5. So that's a significant line move in the last 24 hours. That should probably be something to keep an eye on. 85% of the money is still on Cincinnati. So do with that info what you wish. We're not giving you gambling advice, but that's definitely a line move to keep an eye on as we get closer to the game. Let's talk about Cincinnati a little bit. Obviously, last week, highly publicized comeback loss to Pitt at home. That's got to be really demoralizing for that group. They led 17-3 and then 27-6, and to not get the win is incredibly frustrating. Yeah, we saw that's still a really good football team. On offense, they looked really good, and obviously the defense couldn't get it done towards the end. But so there's a lot of things to be worried about from that Cincinnati team.
Oh, absolutely. If you're up, 27-6, that's 28-3 range, and we all know the memes behind the 28-3 range. But yeah, like
you had
you
to throw
said,
that in. The Connecticut guy had to throw that in, huh?
I'm not a Patriots fan, so
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, look, it happened last year too, right? Miami was down for I want to say a good portion of the game, and they had to keep clawing away at the Bearcats, pun intended. But this as you mentioned, this is a team that struggled against Pitt late in the game. They gave up almost 500 yards of total offense. You're not going to win the game if you're giving up 500 yards, and obviously, as we saw, they didn't. And I don't think that 28-7 tells the whole, or 28-27 tells the whole story of the game. But yeah, even against Towson in week one, the defense didn't look great. There's still a lot of holes in this defense, a lot of holes that Miami was able to exploit last year, and they fixed a couple. But against a lower ranked opponent like Towson, they got off to a very, very slow start. And it was very concerning for Cincinnati fans. And they got off hot against Pitt, and then they just kind of ran out of gas.
Yeah. Let's start on the defensive side of the ball this time. Firstly, it would be remiss if we didn't mention Dante Corleone Jr. It's great to see him back on the field, obviously, after missing some time. That was a really scary story, a really scary time to be around that. So just glad to see he's healthy, glad to see he's okay. And yeah, I mean, he looked as good as advertised and then some. I mean, first game back after lengthy absence, he had 6 tackles, a sack, and a TFL. That is a guy that is going to be an NFL player one day. Like, he is legit. He is as good as advertised, and he is going to be a problem for Miami's offensive line. As good as our offensive line is, that's someone you have to scheme around. That's someone who can break your game plan if you don't plan accordingly. So that's someone that I'm keeping an eye on for sure come Saturday.
Yeah, and against Northwestern, there wasn't really anybody who was going to pressure the quarterback that they needed to scheme around. Northwestern's got a very solid cornerback room. I'm unfortunately blanking on his name, but one of their cornerbacks is incredible, and he's going to be a very good player. But there was no one that was really pressuring Gabbert that they schemed around, and you could kind of see that when some of the edge rushers got off the end and got to Gabbert, and Gabbert needs to figure out what's going to go on with the pocket and the offensive line. So, and that's something to watch, is the offensive line. How are they going to create this pocket, especially against a guy like Dante Corleone Jr.? I mean, if he's having 6 tackles, a sack, and a TFL in his first game against, Pitt, Pitt's nothing to shake your head at,
Mm-hmm.
So Miami's offensive line is going to have a very, very, they're gonna have their hands full. They're gonna have their hands full. And then another guy to look at is Jared Bartlett. He's a 6-year senior. He's a West Virginia transfer, leader on the defensive end of the ball, and he did a little bit of everything so far. He's got 10 tackles, a pass defended, a sack. Those are 2 guys that Chuck Martin's going through the roster and putting little stars next to their name on the defensive side and saying, "Hey, we got to watch out for these guys. These are going to be your highlight players who are going to make big time plays. And if we can keep the ball away from them and get positive yardage, we'll have a great game."
Yeah, I think what worries me the most about a player like Corleone Jr. is that the amount of effort and the amount of attention that's paid to him, what does that mean for the rest of the O-line? If we're doubling him on every play, then that means someone's not covered. And that's what kind of scares me a little bit. Like, guys like Bartlett are going to be able to find those holes. Are guys like him going to be able to sneak around the outside and get to Brett outside of the pocket? So it'll be interesting to see how the coaches scheme for that. I'm a little concerned. I don't think we've, at least to the best of my memory, haven't played a defensive back or defensive tackle with that kind of presence in the last year or so that you really have to scheme around. So I think it'll be something that might wreak havoc, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and maybe they go more jumbo sets where they got 2 tight ends and they say, okay, tight ends and tackles, you're going to have to go one-on-one with somebody, and we'll put center and a guard on Corleone Jr. Or maybe they throw in more running backs. Maybe they have Downing, Dylan Downing or Jordan Brunson coming for more blocks. And, that's no shade towards Kevin Davis or Keon Mosey, who are both very capable blockers, but they're both, they're 5'8" and 5'7" respectively. At least Downing and Brunson are about 6 foot, 6'2" each. So, you got a wrecking ball in Corleone Jr. And I'm sure Martin has been game planning all week to figure out how do we best stop Corleone.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about UC secondary. Josh Minkins, the redshirt senior, the Louisville transfer. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what he brings to the table?
Yeah, absolutely. He's played he played all 4 years at Louisville. He has, I think it was 55 games he's played total over the course of 4 years. He had a hamstring injury last year that kind of hampered him all year. He did not look his best last year, but then he comes to Cincy. He wins the starting job in camp, and last game he had 5 tackles, which you think, oh, he had 5 tackles, that's great, good tackle numbers. But it's not really a great sign when your starting safety is leading your team in tackles.
Right. All right, well, let's move quickly on to the offensive side of the ball. I'll start with Brendan Sorsby, the Indiana transfer at quarterback. In my opinion, one of the most underrated quarterbacks in college football. I think he's legit. I mean, everything he's shown so far has been really impressive with UC. I mean, he's got 5 touchdowns, no picks so far in the season. He had 15 tutters and 5 picks last season. That's great numbers from a starting quarterback in the Power 5. Like, that's as good as you can ask for from a guy coming out of coming off a transfer. He's got the 8th most yards in the country, just under 700, and he's in the top 20 in QBR. I forget what his exact number is, but I think it's like in the 130s, I want to say. But still, there's a lot of good quarterbacks in college football. To be in the top 20 is really impressive. You mentioned it a little bit earlier. He's not exactly a pocket passer. He can get out of the pocket and run a little bit, but he does have a good feel for the pocket. He can sit in there and deliver a nice ball. He had a couple against Pitt that looked really impressive, sat in the pocket, delivered a 40-yard strike over the defender's head. Really nice touch on the deep ball, and it's a completely different threat than what Mike Wright offers. So I think it's going to be a challenge to keep him in check. Corey Kiner at running back is another dynamic threat. He's already averaging more than 7 yards per carry on the season, which is insane considering how iffy Miami's run defense has been so far this year. To have 200 yards in 2 games is incredibly impressive out of the running back. With Sorsby on the threat on the ground too, that read option is going to be scary. Like that is a scary duo to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, I think the thing defensively for Miami is making Sorsby use his legs. Like you mentioned, he can get out of the pocket. He doesn't want to get out of the pocket. That's something I noticed in the Pitt game, and I noticed in the Towson game is he'll stand in there and take a hit. And, like you said, he's got a very good feel for the pocket, but there are times where he holds on to the ball for just a second longer, or he doesn't want to escape the pocket because he thinks he can get something off. And that's going to be what Miami's game plan needs to be, is making Sorsby uncomfortable, making him feel a lot of pressure. And I think you're going to see a lot more blitzes out of this Miami defense, which could backfire. But I think if you try to get Sorsby to make these quick throws, these really small, quick throws, he's going to get uncomfortable. He's going to feel the heat, and he's going to start making mistakes. Because when Sorsby can stay in the pocket for a really long time, like you said, he's going to deliver that nice deep ball, or he's going to get a nice cross over the middle. But if Miami can pressure him, make him feel uncomfortable in the pocket, that's going to be their key to stopping Sorsby. And then, how are they going to stop the run, right?
Yeah.
How are they going to stop the run? That's the big question on everyone's mind this week for the defense. And I personally don't have the answer. I mean, this is a team that's just going to have to figure it out as it goes, which is kind of a tough statement to say when you go Big 10 opponent, Big 12 opponent, and then Notre Dame.
Yeah.
But it's just a team that's going to have to figure it out as they go.
Yeah, and what I think is going to be really interesting to watch in this game is the receiving core at UC. They've got 2 guys who are really experienced and really capable of being really deep threats, and that's Xavier Henderson and Jamoy Mays. I think I'm saying that right. Jamoy Mays had 1,000 yards last year, and right now he's 4th on receiving yards for UC. I keep forgetting his first name. Joe Royer missed 2023, but he's got 138 yards as the tight end right now. Even though he's fighting off a little bit of rust, that's still incredibly impressive. And Sterling Burkhalter, again, is just another guy that is a threat. Those are 4 capable receivers for Miami to worry about, and that's not even taking into account the running aspect that you talked about. So that's my worry with the Miami defense is that's just too many things to worry about, and then things are gonna get missed, and the chunk plays are gonna happen. We'll take that, but how do you lock in and bend and not break?
No, absolutely. I mean, the offensive line for Cincinnati is a strength. All 5 of their starters returned. So these are guys who played together last year, maybe even the year before that, and they're now all playing together again. So they know their tendencies, they know what they're doing. And for a team that's struggling against the run, the worst thing you can see is all 5 starters return from last season. And Northwestern, I think they had 4 or 5 of their all of their starters return on the offensive line. And, there's 150 rushing yards on the ground against Northwestern. So it's going to be a challenge for the Redhawks defensively.
Yeah. All right. To kind of close out this Cincy preview, what has to happen for the Redhawks to create an upset on Saturday? What needs to go right for them?
Simply put, they got to establish a running game. Miami's running game looked less than ideal. And this is kind of the big question we have for the rest of the year is how are the Redhawks going to do without Rashad Amos and Kenny Tracy? As we know, Kenny Tracy is unfortunately hurt. We don't know for how long. We don't really know the severity of the injury, but they're preparing to be without him for a while.
And Rashad Amos, he transferred to a bunch of different places, and then I believe he landed on Ole Miss, if I remember correctly. Went from Oxford to Oxford. But Coach Chuck Martin runs a very old school style of offense that's really focused on this inside running game. You don't really see a ton of stretches, a lot of outside runs. You don't really see a lot of tosses. There's the occasional, wide receiver in motion, jet sweep, whatever. But it's a lot of hard nose, run it straight down the middle, run it down your throat type of football. And this year he doesn't have a Rashad Amos who is he's 6'3", 245 pounds.
Right.
He's the guy to go to. He is your power back. He's going to big body his way through an offensive or defensive line. This year, you have guys like Kevin Davis. You have Jordan Brunson and Dylan Downing. I mean, Downing is 6 foot and Brunson 6'2", I think, or maybe it's the other way around. But Davis and Keon Mosey, they are short running backs. These are these speedy guys, and if they were highly effective last year when Amos could, body his way through, the defense is tired from getting Amos, and then all of a sudden it's boom, let's put in Keon Mosey. He rips off a 20-yard run because now the defense is tired and they're banged up. But I really liked what I saw from Jordan Brunson and Dylan Downing last game. I think, do you have to ride the hot hand a little bit? I think it was a little too much running back by committee. It was too many. It was a lot of just sharing reps. And I think guys like Brunson and Downing, who both of them had more rushing yards than Davis and Mosey. These are guys that you might have to rely on if you're going to run this type of inside zone running game.
Yeah, and I think this is where Miami's offensive line is going to come in huge. Like the fact that we have Reed Holsky back, the fact that we have Borders back, like having these big bodies that can get the push and create the holes is going to be huge for this team. Obviously Amos is gone. We can't replace Amos. 1,000 yards is just not something we can just pull out of thin air. But I think that we can operate the same kind of style that we have, where in my mind, it's probably Brunson being the lead back, being the big body that can fight for the extra yards, and then giving it to Davis and Mosey for like the chunk plays on the ground. At least against Northwestern, I saw Downing as more of a receiving back. He seems like more of a threat when you got him in space on the sidelines and you get him on like one-on-one against a corner. It seemed like he was able to create more than straight up the middle on the inside zone. So I think that's the way I would run it if I was in Chuck Martin's shoes. Obviously, I don't envy his position trying to replace a running back who's now with one of the best teams in the SEC. But I think that's how it has to be done. I don't see anyone – obviously, I don't think anyone's going to come in and replace Amos's production in any way, shape, or form. I don't think anyone's going to reach 1,000 yards. I don't think anyone's going to get in the end zone more than 10 times. But I think if you can create this kind of offense where you have one guy do the dirty work and then open up the chunk plays on the ground and then have the threat in the flats, that can work if it's done effectively and against the right opponent in the right situations. But I think there's still a lot to figure out before we play Cincy and then obviously travel to Notre Dame.
Yeah, and the old adage is like if you establish the running game, then the passing game opens up way more. And I think unfortunately what happened last week or 2 weeks ago at this point against Northwestern was we didn't have a running game, so we had to rely a lot on the passing game. And when Northwestern knows it's coming, they know it's coming. And also, it happens with playing from behind. And you saw it when there's a couple minutes left in the game, and every play is just 3-yard pass, 3-yard pass, 4-yard pass, first down, whatever it is. And I think establishing the run is going to be huge for Miami to win this game. But I think Gabbert has to look like pre-injury form 2023 Gabbert.
Yeah.
That he's going to have to shake off the rust a lot quicker than he did. One of his interceptions wasn't his fault. Last or 2 weeks ago, it was just a bad bounce that just popped right into Northwestern's hands. But the one that sealed the game was it looked like it was a bit of a miscommunication between him and his receiver. He thought his receiver was going a little bit more. He tried to lead his receiver a bit too much. But when you're in the 2-minute drill and you're a 6-year senior, like you know, I don't know. I don't want to be too hard on him because again, it's much easier to sit here and say this. And
Right.
I mean, I am not a quarterback. I have not played quarterback since I was a kid. Like, so it's a lot easier to sit here and critique than it is to go out there and perform. But I think he's gotta shake off the rust a lot quicker.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, at the end of the day, he is a sixth-year quarterback who has been through these big games. He's seen these moments. He's played under those lights. So if anything's going to happen for Miami, I have a feeling that it's going to be because of five. Like if it's going to be because of the quarterback, it's going to be because of how he plays. And I think you made a great point. If they can get these 3 to 4 yard passes going and get Cincy's defense moving backward, even if it's in the air, on the ground or in the air, I don't mind, as long as it's these consistent 3 to 4 yard gains that are getting first downs. I think that's huge. I think that tires out their defense. I think too often Miami would get to third down, get a 12-yard gain. And yes, we moved the ball for a first down, but we're not really tiring out the defense. We're not keeping them moving. We're not keeping them guessing. So I think that's something that has to happen. We got to get the little plays to open up the chunk plays. And I think that if we're able to get 4 or 5 consistent, like 2 to 3 yard gains, that can open up the playbook a whole lot more than we were able to do against Northwestern.
This is going to be a completely different Miami team than we saw week one. This is going to be a team that has some rest. You know, they got a week off. They got a week to game plan and recover. And, you know, this is going to be a team that's going to look a lot different. And I think they're going to come out in front of their home fans with a lot of energy, a lot of fire. I mean, that's not to downplay Cincinnati. They're going to come in with a lot of fire because they lost a game that they should have won. But we may see a little bit more of a defeated Cincinnati team if Miami's able to get stuff going early.
Yeah, and I also think Miami's, and Cincy is too to some extent, but Miami's playing with their season on the line. If like Northwestern was, I mean, obviously in retrospect we can't really say that they could have won, but that's a winnable game. If they start the season 1-0 and beat Cincinnati and we're 2-0, you're looking at possibly being ranked. Obviously, that's not going to happen now. 0-1. If there's a viable chance that Miami enters the MAC play 0-4.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that's tough to recover from.
Yeah. So in my opinion, they're playing with their season on the line. If we beat Cincinnati, then suddenly we're 1-1. Go against a Notre Dame team where they're vulnerable. They haven't played well. Obviously, they just lost to another MAC school in NIU. So I don't want to say they're there for the taking because it's still Notre Dame, but it might be a closer game than some people were thinking 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too much into that Notre Dame game, NIU did a great job of exposing the weaknesses of the offensive skill players for Notre Dame. They were kind of hyped up a lot more than they maybe should have been. But, you know, I think we're going to see a much better Notre Dame team than I think NIU saw. It doesn't help that Thomas Northcutt from NIU is actively helping Marcus Freeman over at Notre Dame, saying, "Oh, here's how we game plan for you. Here's how we did this." Maybe Chuck Martin needs to get on the phone and say, "Hey, you want to help us? You want to help out your MAC buddies? Notre Dame go down again." But focusing on Cincinnati, I just can't say how excited I am for this game.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it at length. This is probably one of the biggest game days that Oxford's going to see in a long time. There's going to be a lot of buzz. There's going to be a lot of excitement. There's going to be people everywhere. I don't think Oxford's going to be as busy as it's going to be on Saturday in a long time. The excitement's palpable. It started already. It's Thursday at 4, and we're already super excited about it. So yeah, Oxford, Ohio is going to be the place to be on Saturday, and I could not be more excited for the game.
Should have brought College Game Day down. I think they're down at South Carolina right now, but South Carolina LSU. I mean, there's no better place than Oxford, Ohio.
No, Oxford, Ohio is going to be rocking on Saturday.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Ted, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on for this first episode. Keep an eye out. This will be a weekly thing. Me and Ted will be on here every Thursday talking Miami sports and recapping the week's action. Ted, anything else you want to say before we wrap up here?
No, I had an absolute blast. I'm excited to see where we can take this together. And I'm really appreciative of everybody at the Riverfront who, reached out to me and brought me along. And, because I'm new around here, I'll throughout my socials. They're kind of linked down there. T Brennan 15, that's my main one, and then T Brennan Sports, that's one where I'll post, podcast stuff and graphic stuff or whatever it may be. So if you want to leave me a follow, go for it. If you just want to listen to my voice, go for it.
Awesome. Well, Ted, thanks for coming on. We will see you next Thursday for the Cincinnati recap and the Notre Dame preview.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't wait. You too.
Have a good week.